Jane, do you have the indictment?
I have it.
Okay.
So I just hand it back to you.
Okay. You bring the jury. All jurors present, Your Honor. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not exactly sure if Mr. Savage was interested in talking to, whether it was you or those people back there. You can rest assured that everything we've done in this case has been for you, for your view, for your consideration, not for anybody else out there. We don't have our head in the sand. We know that there are things going on in this country, but you cannot let your decision be based on things going on elsewhere. This is a almost sacred place. This is a place that we judge what people do, not who they are. We cannot let this be a place where cases get decided based on who somebody looks like, who they hang out with, who you'd rather have over for dinner. It has to be on the actions. It has to be on what they did. This isn't just a pick and choose. He talked about a card game. It's not just let me draw a card and see what indictment I present to the grand jury. You heard the testimony. SLED made the call. They arrested Mr. Slager for murder. I presented this case to the grand jury, and the grand jury indicted. You will also hear the judge tell you that this isn't evidence, because this is what gets the charge to you. Nobody has had as much information about this case than you do. No jury, no law enforcement, nobody. This indictment brought us here. The judge, based on the law, based on the rules that apply to both sides, to everyone, the judge has decided that the lesser included offense of voluntary manslaughter is appropriate. We don't take issue with that. These are complicated, important decisions that have to be made, and they have to be made on the facts. You know, it is true that we picked you because every one of you could have said, every one of you said you could set aside whatever you'd seen and heard, and you promised to do that. You know what you didn't have to set aside? You didn't have to set aside me giving interviews, me on the courthouse steps talking about this case. Not at all. This is too important. I am a career prosecutor. I've done this from the very beginning, and it matters. I work with these people in law enforcement every day. Our whole criminal justice system rides on the back of law enforcement. It's not just the weight of a duty belt. It's not just a vest. They have the weight of our nation on their backs. And there's nobody that's more grateful for that than I am. But because of that, they have to be held responsible when they mess up. It is very, very rare, but it does happen. Why does it happen? Not necessarily because someone's a bad person, not because someone's necessarily an evil person. People make mistakes, and this courtroom is the place that we hold people accountable. Accountability is key. If we don't hold people accountable when they mess up, it all falls apart. It's a mess. Think about that when you make your decision on these facts, not what's out there. Nowhere but here. Nothing but what's here should guide your decision. And I submit to you, when you look at all the evidence, and I'm not going through every witness, y'all have been here. Y'all have been awake and alert. But I am going to highlight some key things, and I'm also, hopefully to help y'all do your jobs, and I'm not trying to get in y'all's business, but there are 300 or 400 exhibits. There are discs, there are thumb drives. I'm going to try to let y'all know which ones, in our view, you need to take a look at, and which ones, if you're looking for something in particular, that you can go to. Okay? Let me just start with, this is going to be very important because you also had and saw and heard several things that will not go back with you to the jury room. Like, for instance, Mr. Williams' timeline. I'm going to play it here for you today, but you can't have that in the jury room. What you can have is State's Exhibit 8. And State's Exhibit 8 is the real-time audio with everything playing and everybody that was coming over dispatch. That will be in evidence for you to take a look at. State's Exhibit 253. You're going to have gobs and gobs of paper photographs, but we also gave you the digital photographs in case you wanted to zoom in case you wanted to search around as well as you could, high pixels, all of that. That's State's Exhibit 253. All the photographs there. Y'all may remember, and I'll talk about him more as we move forward, but State's Exhibit 12, State's Exhibit 249 and 250. These are the FBI enhanced videos. When you get into these, there are going to be a number of files, hundreds of files. So it can be time consuming. And I'm not saying y'all need to go through every one of them. I'm just saying if when I go through my argument, or when you look through your notes and you remember Mr. Emmel, the FBI guy who came down, if you want to look at something he did, it's going to be in 12, 249, or 250. I've got a number of photographs here that we'll talk about in a minute. The taser log that had the times on it of when the tasers and the timing of the tasers. Mr. Savage talked to you about that. Is number 14. So mainly the thumb drives and things that are on the thumb drives and the discs are things that I think you might find important. When I first met y'all, and I got to talk to y'all for the first time, just before I sat down, I told you something, and I'm going to tell you again. Don't let anybody tell you that they can see something or hear something any better than you. You own the facts. They are yours. We can state our position. You've heard the testimony that you're going to have a computer, you're going to have a big screen back there, it's going to be wired in. You make the call on what you see, because it doesn't take a PhD, an MD, a degree to know what you see and what you hear. And one of my favorite quotes, not from one of our people, was from David Halmore. He was a bald guy that was a defense expert. He did the sound enhancement for the defense. And he told you the best product out there is the human brain. And that's why we appreciate you, because you bring it home. You've got the common sense to see through the smoke and mirrors, to understand what's a red herring and what's not. We've been here for 4 or 5 weeks now. Feels like a year. And I really don't know how y'all done it, but thank you. You've seen lots of smoke. You've seen lots of mirrors. And just this morning, you've heard about how it's everybody else's fault. Everybody except Michael Slager. His uniform is too heavy. His vest is too much. His belt weighs a bunch. Habersham had been to City Hall. 2.5 minutes he got there. 2.5 minutes Habersham made it. Accountability. You heard that there's no PT training after the academy. Okay, maybe there should be, maybe there shouldn't. But if someone's going out on the street and knowing they're dealing with the public and knowing they're going to be in an altercation, who ought to be keeping themselves in shape? Who ought to be on top of that? Yeah, it'd be nice maybe if the department required it, but own it. You saw those guys who came in here who were on SWAT. You saw those guys who've been on patrol, I think Biskirk, like 24 years, fit and trim, because they know what they got to do. You know, the idea that because someone gets winded, they can't make a decision is ludicrous. It's ludicrous. And don't be fooled about that sort of thing. You've heard for weeks, oh, it's a murder investigation. And they didn't do this, they didn't do that. You heard so many things that were fought about that in the end, everybody agreed to. What was that about? It was to distract you. Look away, look away, look away. Don't look at that video. Look at everything else, everybody else, but don't look at that video. Was it a murder investigation on that Saturday morning? Think about it. Was it a murder investigation? Was the crime scene treated like a murder investigation? I'm not pointing fingers. But think about it. Was the evidence collected like it was a murder? Was Michael Slager treated like a murderer? No. Because they bought everything he said that day. Hook, line, and sinker. And I don't have a problem with that, but the irony is rich that Mr. Savage bashed so many people about what they did and what they didn't do because they believed him. They believed him until they didn't, until they knew better. Pictures from Santana's video where he's embraced. I understand that. Take his gun, the gun used in the shooting, switch it out, give him another one because we don't want the officer to feel uncomfortable without a gun. That's fine. I'm the first one to say, look, we put a badge on these people, we give them a gun, and we send them into some pretty bad places. We got to give them some deference at the front end of an investigation. I'm not bashing them. But to come around the back end and talk like there was some ulterior motive on Angela Peterson's part because of the way this investigation ran, to act like, you know, Slade just wanted to rush to get a murder charge is ridiculous. And it's not supported by the facts. Look at how you will have the dash cam videos also. And they are, you know, the most important one probably will be States 2 because that is Officer Slager's dash cam. I think that is Gann, who was one of the first on the scene, and Webb. The 2 and 3 will be the guys who showed up on the scene. The rest of these are every other officer who showed up that day. But if you decide you want to look at the dash cam videos, because on Officer Slager's dash cam, which is was incorporated into Mr. Williams' timeline, you can hear some body mic transmissions. You heard the testimony, as they got more distant, it would break up. But some of it is on here if you want State's Exhibit 2. So, again, while I'm not being critical of the way this was carried out initially, there were some things that were probably missed. And that's not only because it was an officer involved, but there was somebody dead and things were hectic. And the more people you have responding to something, I mean, too many chiefs, can you imagine? With that many cops responding, you know, who's on first? It's chaotic at first. And this happens, it happens in every case. It doesn't mean someone's incompetent. And there is something else that we need to talk about, and that's loyalty. And I sort of made reference to it yesterday, and I used the wrong word when I said bias, because bias, even though that has kind of a legal connotation, I don't mean that anyone had or has a negative bias. Law enforcement, the military, they have to have loyalty to each other to survive every day. There's nothing wrong with that. It is, however, something that you should consider when you hear witnesses testify. And the judge will talk to you, because another thing that you get besides the facts, you get to decide the credibility of all the witnesses. You get to believe all, some, none, part, whatever you pick and choose. So think about that loyalty when you're filtering through your notes of what people told you. And again, thank goodness they have the brotherhood. It keeps me safe every day. Every day. But looking at the evidence and the way things were handled, and the way that Mr. Savage would have you look at this video and ask yourself this scenario, and Mr. Simpson hit on this with one of the witnesses one of these days this week. If there were a surveillance video and it captured two people struggling on the ground, husband and wife, brothers, gang members, whatever, and that video captured as they came out of this struggle, the wife runs away, the brother runs away, whoever, somebody runs away, and the video captures the person left behind, pulling out a gun and shooting them 8 times in the back. Would there be this delay to interview? Would there be this talk about, selective memory, and maybe they just don't have the details right, maybe they didn't realize that the person dropped the taser or the knife or the whatever it was? Would there have been all of that talk by law enforcement? No. And police officers have more training than the typical husband and wife, more training than the brothers who don't get along and fight, and somebody ends up dead. More training for sure than gang members. But we hold them responsible for what they say. We hold them responsible for what they report to police. There's not this cloak of, spaghetti brain that anybody else gets to have. Sure, people's memories fade. They don't have 100% recall. That's human nature. We don't need MD, PhD, whatever he was, who was delightful, to come down and tell us that. You know that. You know it. Let's talk about the struggle, and let's talk about those burn fibers. It is, I hope that you've seen enough so far to know we're not hiding anything from you. I mean, Mr. Savage got up here and said, Sled didn't tell you about the burn fibers. Megan Fletcher testified to you about the burn fibers on the corner of the shirt pocket. Sled found those fibers. Sled testified about those fibers. And how many times did you hear Mr. Savage in parts of his testimony talking about how a document had SAW, R5 SAW on it? Here's one right here. R5 SAW 1279. It's in Miss Wilson's discovery. That's because what we have goes to them. They're free to put on their case. They don't have to. The burden's ours, but they chose to. R5, Rule 5, Scarlett Ann Wilson, page 1279, out of thousands of pages. Nobody's hiding anything from you. And for that argument to be made, that ought to tell you something. You know what it tells you? Look at her. Look at her, the politician. Yeah, who's getting a whole lot out of this. Look at her, the rookie agent. But don't look at that video. You heard Megan Fletcher talk about how they had the uniform shirt, which you will have. You cannot see with the naked eye any kind of burn fibers. Y'all have it. You might still be able to see where they swabbed for Officer Slager's blood on his pants and on his shirt, but you will not find any visible fibers. That said, you have that evidence. Megan Fletcher testified to you about it, and what she told you was, and their witness butchered what she told you, but you have your notes, you have your memory. When they did the drive stun test with the sample shirt, every time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when they drive stun, every time they got holes. They got holes and they got burn fibers. The longer, the bigger, the more, that sort of thing. That makes sense. What they didn't find on Officer Slager's shirt was holes. They found a couple of burn fibers. So think about that, and think about that taser. Remember Dr. Kroll giggling about how he got tased on the stand one time, and it took 3 different times to get a battery going so that we could get this taser running so that they could show you what it sounded like, what it looked like. Do y'all remember the taser going off? When the trigger's pulled, it goes off for 5 seconds, no matter what. It's running. Electricity's going. So let's think about that when we go through the timeline. Because what do we know, and what do the experts all agree about? This is from Mr. Williams' timeline. Just a reminder. Santana's video. You can see the cord of his phone. And he told you that he turned it on right as he was walking off. The last taser was activated about in here. When you had your earphones on, you could hear that click. After that point, no trigger pull of the taser by anyone. Nobody. So I'm going to, States 249 is going to be Mr. Emmel's enhanced videos. And I'm going to go through some of the photos from that. Some of them are similar to the ones that Mr. Savage showed you, and yes, you'll be able to click through all the ones you want to click through. But I want to tell you something. Remember what Mr. Emmel said. FBI Emmel. He knows exactly how much he got paid to be here. 0. Versus Mr. Fredericks, who miraculously, unlike Mr. Slager, tells you that Walter Scott had Michael Slager in a headlock based on 1/30th of a second from a frame of these videos. But what Mr. Emmel told you, danger. I'm telling y'all too, danger when you go through those still images. Why? Because it's 1/30th of a second. Mr. Emmel who reeked of credibility, told you to be careful because there's so much blur. There's so much blur, and it's 1/30th of a second. He wouldn't even give an opinion based on the still photos solely. You have them. You can look at them. What I would ask you to look at is not only the stills, but go through and watch that struggle. It's just a few seconds, and y'all be able to, rewind and back up. Go through it. Watch the dynamic motion of the struggle. And look for this. You look for those shoes. Those are Walter Scott shoes. They're the whitest thing out there. You remember what Officer Slager had on, dark all the way down. Mr. Scott had on those white tennis shoes, navy pants, a white undershirt, and a green shirt. And what you will see is the blur of those shoes in the air, not a position of control. But Mr. Fredericks, oh, he's in a headlock. And that's just about like saying that I just said Heil Hitler. You can't take that kind of thing out of context. But watch enough of it and see for yourself the direction of the blur, the color of the blur, and you reach your own conclusion about it. So these are the stills that you have, and you have even more than this. You can sort of see the green and the blue. Can't see much in that one at all, and I've got the frame numbers listed above. Again, the green, the blue. The blue there, up in the air. You see no green there. I mean, no green in the pants part. No green there. Start to see some white blur there. I believe this is the one that Mr. Fredericks claimed close to it was the one within the headlock. I'm not sure. But look at the blur of the white. Look at the motion of the white. Look at that in the air. I'm going to take you, before I go to Mr. Williams' timeline, I'm going to go through kind of old school. What we have, and if you'll think about, again, what I was saying regarding the fact that there were no taser burns, no trigger pull at all after Santana's video. So, first of all, if those are taser burns or burn fibers on Mr. Slager's uniform, when did they get there? Did they get there on April 4th? Do we know? Mr. Slager told you he'd been in training. He told you he'd gotten tased several times. I don't know when the burn fibers got there. Maybe they got there on that day. And let's walk through how that could have happened other than Walter Scott gaining control of that taser and, ooh, let me think about it while my mama's on the phone. Picking up my phone to run because he's so dead set on killing Officer Slager. And that's another thing. You know, when it suits Mr. Savage, it's good enough that something's not on video. When it doesn't, he argues the other way. For example, there's no evidence that Walter Scott was tased. You don't hear that on video. You don't hear him scream out. What did you hear? You hear his mama, Judy Scott, telling you she was on the phone. You heard the testimony. She knew to call her son and her grandson to say, check on your daddy. Yeah, this deadbeat dad. Oh, they want y'all to think he's such a deadbeat. His son, who's at Liberty University now, was living with him. His other son, for which he owed child support, had spent the night before. He was with her while they went to go get him glasses. When Walter Scott, this evil, oh, he's armed and dangerous. Michael Slager couldn't wait to say that, could he? From a 1991 conviction. 25 years ago. Trying so hard to make y'all think he's a thug. Just one of you think he's a thug, and then it doesn't matter. When he gets stopped, what does he do? You have the phone log. He's such a thug. He calls his girlfriend that he's lived with for 6 years. Can't get her, and he calls his mother because he's knowing that he's going to jail. And you can call it debtor's prison, you can call it debtor's jail, you can call it whatever. We spent 2 hours with a lawyer from the local bar telling you what happens when someone has a family court bench warrant. They go to jail, and they don't know when they're going to get out. And it depends on what judge you get as to how you're going to be treated. Again, I'm not endorsing not paying your child support, but come on. So we start out, within 9 seconds, tasered out. Stop or I'll tase you. We got taser trigger 1. Again, we don't know what hit, what worked, what didn't, but we know we got taser trigger 1. Then we've got immediately, 5 seconds after taser trigger 2. You can hear Slager saying on the ground. Taser trigger 2 ends, we go to 3. Then to 4. You remember Officer Slager told Bowman, Lieutenant Bowman, out of the scene, he told him that he had tased Scott twice. So we've got these 2 deployments that are probes. And we can deduce that taser 3 is also a probe because it's just 1 second apart. And remember, if the probes are in or they think the probes are in, they can keep the trigger down or pull it again and it'll give another jolt if the probes have made contact. And all the testimony from Mr. Slager to Bowman, to Sled, and even here this week, he said he didn't know, but back then he knew for sure because he's used his taser, hasn't he? He knows how that taser works. Locked up. Mr. Scott locked up and fell forward. And how do we know that's true? Walter Scott has an abrasion, a bruise on his cheek. Because when you lock up, you're not breaking your fall. You're down. And there's no reason to believe that the taser didn't work. Slager told you just yesterday, he drives home Sunday once, possibly twice. He told Bowman that day he tased him twice, drive stun. The ribs and the back. You heard testimony that the taser doesn't always leave marks. You know that Mr. Scott had on clothes. And you know what his mama heard and what Faith Santana heard was him groaning like they'd never heard. His mother said it was an awful sound that she heard. She said that before anybody knew anything about a taser log. She said that before she knew anything from the scene. She's directing her son and her grandson, get there. She's not sending them there because her son's been stopped for a brake light or her son's been stopped for speeding. She heard this. His son heard this, his young son, who we didn't call. Because we're not here trying to make you or ask you to rule or to bring back a verdict based on emotion. We didn't create a child in here to say, let me tell you about the day I heard my daddy die. make your decision based on facts. 2 drive stunts. And then the Santana video starts and Taser 6 ends. Now, if you're on the ground with somebody and you're drive stunning them, and they're squirming, they're moving around, that taser's going off. How many officers did you hear say they had been tased by another officer or themselves? It is just as likely, if not more likely, that Michael Slager accidentally, while drive stunning a Walter Scott who's doing you know what, trying to get that thing away from him, that it brushed on his shirt, because there are no holes. There are no holes. There wasn't a direct drive stunt. It was movement. It was a swipe. If it even happened that day. We then go down to where the 2 men come on both feet. And that's where you see them come up from being on the ground. You see them holding each other. Well, you see Slager holding his Walter Scott's right arm, and then you see him break away, and you see the shot. And so what I'd like to do now is play the timeline, which will be on both screens, and let you see how this unfolds visually when Mr. Williams paired that up with the evidence as it was on Craig Road and as it was on the Yellow Brick Road.
On a gray color Mercedes, take tag 1318, golf call.
Before he starts that, let me talk about one thing. Let's get this out. I don't have Mr. Durant's training. When you're evaluating the testimony, and when you're evaluating getting to the truth and getting to the bottom of things, I want to remind you of the work that Bill Williams put into these projects. And then ask you to remember Grant Fredericks, who was the defense expert, who made this pat on the head. Bill Williams is not incompetent, or he's not evil, he's not meaning to mislead you, he's just incompetent. And then what is the next thing we hear from him? That his timeline matched up exactly with Bill Williams' timeline. You know, he tried to tell you that Bill Williams was misleading you because when you have these dash cam videos, that's what it's going to look like. Because when it pops up on the computer and you use the L3 proprietary player, that's what it looks like. Mr. Williams wasn't trying to show you or enhance any kind of video from this stop. There's nothing that important besides the audio of the stop on there. Mr. Frederick sat here and talked to you about how he cut off the whole right side and how you weren't getting to see the whole L3 video, and he just thought he ought to let you know. And by the way, the PowerPoint stretched out his distances. And then what did he do? When he went to adjust the PowerPoint, when he went to adjust this slide or the slides on the PowerPoint, he shrunk the picture for y'all because it was so misleading, and then he didn't move the lines. He left the lines where they were. And then since that time, what have you learned about Bill Williams' measurements? He told you approximately 17 feet in the first shot. What did Licio tell you with the fancy Pharaoh? 18 feet. It's all right there. That was a show. It was a show to get you not to pay attention to what matters.
on a gray color Mercedes, take tag 1318, golf call.
This is County 223 at 933.
Five five one records channel.
This is County 55 933.
You like to take insurance card? What's that? Okay, let's start with your license. Reason for the stop is your third brake light stop. Okay.
I don't have to get because that's it. I just bought the stuff my neighbor. I was trying to do that money. He still has insurance for every one car.
So, do you have insurance on the car?
No, I don't have insurance.
Okay.
Okay, the big deal about the insurance card. Now, first of all, you think maybe Mr. Scott's a little nervous there? You can hear that conversation. Michael Slager clearly does not believe it. Not blaming him for not believing him, but you heard the testimony from the neighbor and how they were in the process of buying this car. He's nervous, he's saying, and they were in, I mean, Pierre Fulton said that, Charlotte Jones said that. They had met, they had exchanged the cars, they hadn't done the paperwork at the DMV, and that's what Walter Scott's saying. And he's saying, and yes, you have an insurance card in evidence, but whose insurance card is it? It ain't Walter Scott's. It's his neighbor's. And he says, no, I don't have insurance. You know? I don't have it. He knows Slager doesn't believe it. He knows this isn't going well. It doesn't justify what he did, but come on.
Well, if you don't have insurance on your car, you bought it, you have to have insurance.
Well, I haven't bought it yet. I'm saying I'm about to do that Monday.
You just told me you bought
I'm
it.
drive the car.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because my car is down. So you can roll the car.
Okay.
I can call in and you can
Fine. Let me have your driver. So you don't have any paperwork in the glove box? No registration in there, no insurance?
He has all that stuff.
Why is it? Okay. But you're buying this car?
Yes, sir.
Did you already buy it?
No, not yet. I'm about to buy it.
It's a minute ago you told me you bought it.
Well,
And you're changing everything over on Monday.
I'm sorry about that. They're going to, I'm going to do everything over Monday.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll be right back with you. Let's get the car.
Just got 1080 on foot, down Craig Street, black male, green shirt, blue pants.
Black male, green shirt, blue pants, down Craig Street. All units north in emergency status due to 223 station on foot.
Five dispatch a copy. I'm en route from Scarsville Code. 241 en route.
Copy, 936.
We're en route to help. 223. What's your direction of travel down? What we got now?
All right, we're at Taser 4 now. Remember that, Taser 4.
right down Craig Street. Right on the road. Turn right down. Yellow driveway to the pawn shop.
Talk about more Rivers heading that way now.
156, step it up.
156, step it up. At that point, Officer Slager is fine. He's fine. Yes, he needs some help. He doesn't call Habersham because he's a juggernaut. He calls Habersham because he's his partner. He knows he can get there quickly, and Habersham did get there quickly. But at that point, Slager is fine. Yes, he's a little winded. Yes, he wants his partner to come up. Yes, he's having some trouble with Walter Scott. But he isn't in distress from being tased. In fact, he never got distress from being tased, because you recall he doesn't remember being tased.
Damn, I run cold.
5-5 dispatch, give me a call for Craig.
Remount Road next to the Money Man and the fire station.
So, at that point, we don't have video as to what happened, and we aren't trying to tell you that Walter Scott was submissive until that point. Slager was clearly having an issue with him, and he had clearly tried to tase him several times. And yes, you heard from multiple people who've been tased, when that thing's hitting you, you want it off. And yes, you touch it. Regardless of how it was swabbed, we would expect to find DNA on that taser. So let's go back to the struggle, and I'm not going to talk to y'all all afternoon about what kind of shirt stays Officer Slager had on. It's a colossal waste of time. But look at Officer Slager from the Santana video. Look at his uniform after this violent struggle. I'm not saying there wasn't a struggle. Walter Scott did not want to be tased. It did not feel good. There's no evidence he was coming after that man. No evidence of that. We understand he has on a belt that is very secure. We understand that he had on pant stays or shirt stays. But to say that fabric or that rubber gasket can't be torn if there's such a violent struggle is preposterous. This is what I think is the most important. This is, again, this isn't minutes later. This is seconds later. The body is still there. Habersham's working on it. Look at his earpiece. The earpiece that goes around his back, which is still attached, and is sticking in his ear. Now, if he's in a chokehold, a headlock, a violent struggle, that's the first thing to go. Look what else. There it is, close up. That's a front view. He's giving instructions to somebody about Mr. Scott. His badge is still attached. His radio is still attached. His nameplate is still attached. And look right there. Walter Scott's driver's license still tucked very nicely right there in his belt. That is not the sign of a violent, throw-down, life-threatening fight. More proof? Minutes after. You know, after he's left the immediate area where Walter Scott was on the ground, and he goes back to Bowman's car, and they come take photographs of him. Look at it. He has a cut on his hand, a glorified paper cut. And I have no doubt it came from that taser. No doubt. He has dirt on the knees of his pants. Of course he does. He's down trying to handcuff Walter Scott. Hours later, Mr. Savage said something about punched in the nose. There's no punch in the nose. Look at his face at the police department. Do you see scratches? Do you see redness, puffiness? No. You see none of that from this violent struggle, this fight. Close up with his hands. There's the cut right there on his left hand. His watch isn't broken. His watch isn't cracked. And my goodness, he's got 2 skinny knees. Now let's compare that. I'm not gonna put up for the whole world to see. Maybe not anybody to see. But I want you to take a look in the privacy of your jury room, the autopsy photographs. If you have any doubt that you had the better end of that struggle, you'll know it when you see the autopsy pictures. It's been a while, but you got it. I'm not going to make y'all look at all of these in front of everybody, but 171 through 175, six exhibits. I am going to show you 176, which is pictures of Walter Scott's hands. They've been chewed up by asphalt. Chewed up, abrasion on his elbow. And I want you to take note of what else the doctor said, Dr. Tormos. She said he had that abrasion that's consistent with hitting the asphalt on his cheekbone. He also had a bruise, a bad bruise on the back of his head. And she also told you that they took fingernail clippings because he had long fingernails. Not one piece, not one loci, not one shred of Michael Slager's DNA is under those fingernails. Nothing. He's not trying to get that guy. He's trying to get away from him. Even Michael Slager on the stand yesterday said when they got up, he fully expected Scott to run away. Why did he expect that? He expected that because the whole thing moved from advanced auto and it was moving that way the whole time because he wanted to get away. He did not want to go to jail that day. He picked a sorry way to do it. He should be sitting there right now on trial for resisting arrest. But North Charleston's own policy, the own oath that Michael Slager took, says the protection of life must always take priority over the apprehension of criminals. Mr. Savage says, you don't just let them go. No, you don't always just let them go. And I'm not suggesting that at all. But sometimes you got to use some discretion and judgment. And was it really worth all of that? Was it really worth all of that? And I mentioned it earlier. I don't have to rehash it, but we've sat here for weeks and heard Walter Scott's character be assassinated. Yes, he had a low level of cocaine in his blood. And then do you remember when we had that toxicologist 2-3 weeks ago testify and how Mr. Savage got up and talked to y'all about how the BZE level was like off the charts and how people admitted to the hospital had these high BZE levels and people who had OD'd or been involved in bad wrecks and things with cocaine had these astronomical BZE levels. And then what, come to find out, what do we know? You have the report. BZE is a non-intoxicating byproduct that raises as cocaine is being eliminated in the system. Total red herring, just to make you think that Walter Scott was out of it. He wasn't out of it. You heard Tony, you heard Anthony. He talked to him the Wednesday night before, when Walter said he would take a car, and they were supposed to go to a party that Friday night, and they didn't go. And he told you didn't know if Walter went or not, but what did the toxicologist we called and the pathologist that they called from North Carolina tell you? That low level of cocaine was consistent with 9 to 12 hours before death. What does that put you at? 9 o'clock at night, midnight. He wasn't strung out. He had just been to a church. He had just seen his uncle's girlfriend. He had Pierre Fulton with him. They were going to get some food and have a cookout. What's most telling, again, not what was said on the scene, but 3-4 days later, when Michael Slager had those REM cycles, remember, the doctor yesterday said they can be good. He doesn't know whether he recommends waiting a few days to interview law enforcement after a traumatic event, but REM cycles can help you recall. What is the word that Michael Slager used? He used it yesterday to describe Walter Scott underneath him. You remember? He said he was wiggling. That is not the word you use to describe a violent, life-threatening struggle. He was wiggling. And with 50,000 volts, I bet he was wiggling. He didn't say thrashing. He didn't say pummeling. Yes, it matters, the words he used to describe what was happening to him. I think the evidence is clear, is while there was some resisting arrest, it wasn't all that. And it didn't have to result in what it resulted in. And so the questions that you probably have are the questions that we've been dealing with, not only in this trial, but since the beginning. Who had the taser last and what happened to it? Does it matter? And so I want to go through those with you and hopefully wrap up for y'all pretty soon. Who had the taser last? What happened to it? Does it matter? Does it matter if Slager actually really did believe that Scott had the taser? And it's important that you think about those things. So the only evidence that we have that Scott ever had the taser in his hand is from the defendant. All of the experts, Fredericks, Licio, Bill Williams, Emmel, they tell you because of the frames per second or because of where the taser was being obscured, whatever, that until you aren't going to see the taser until it's on the ground. You just aren't. It's not there. Y'all can sit there and look through 25,000 frames and they're there. And Licio, and I'm going to come back to him. He's the guy from Canada who did the Pharaoh. And you may remember my last question to him, the devil's in the details. And he said it sure is. It is. We'll get to that in a minute. So if you don't know where the taser is, if Michael Slager doesn't know where the taser is, when you watch that video, you look, and what is the first thing he does after he stops firing? He looks down right there. He knew where that taser was. He knew where it was. How it got there, we have our theory, you'll have yours. But he knew where it was. If you don't know where the taser is, why don't you? Why don't you? When you go over to Walter Scott and you get him handcuffed, stop looking for the taser. He tried to tell you yesterday, oh, when he was there, he saw it 55 feet down on the road. He hasn't even looked. When y'all watch it, he hasn't looked when he gets there. And if you look, and you don't see it, and you believe that Walter Scott had the taser, where do you think it is? Underneath him. He never asked, he never rolled that body over, because he knew where to go. He knew exactly where to go. He knows that taser is a problem for him. Because what does he do after he's shooting? And he goes to handcuff Walter Scott because he's still so dangerous. He walks to Walter Scott. I understand he'd been in his trouble, but he still had adrenaline. He walks to Walter Scott. He's not still drawing down on him. He handcuffs him. And the first time we see him hauling it, is he's hauling it to go get that taser before Havisham gets there. He is on his way to get that taser. That's what his instincts told him to do. His instincts told him to get that taser, and they told him to drop that taser right by Walter Scott. There is no good explanation for that. There is no excuse for that. And so, what is the explanation? Charles Morgan, the doctor you heard from yesterday. And I submit to you, Dr. Morgan was a tremendous help to your understanding of this case. He talked about critical stress and what it can do to you. And I'm not saying that Michael Slager and Walter Scott weren't in a stressful situation. They were. But there's a difference in being stressed, especially someone who's been involved in 16, 18 taser incidents, and someone who never has. Dr. Morgan told you about the 19 indicia of critical stress incidents, including, losing control of your body functions, all sorts of different things. And Michael Slager had none of them, except Michael Slager claimed he had tunnel vision when the taser was coming after him, and it looked huge. He knew where that taser was. And his critical stress is so horrible and he's so out of sorts that he's able to hit a moving target 5 out of 8 times from a range of 18 feet to 40 feet. That's not critical stress, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Morgan told you, even if he didn't mean to, self-serving interests can affect memory. Mr. Simpson gave the example, and he corroborated, even just doing a silly little study, if you offer somebody $10, it's going to affect them. Even if they aren't trying to lie or they aren't trying to mess up the study, it affects you. Saving your hide definitely affects you. And you can talk about memory all you want. It's not like memory. He's exactly right. Thank goodness. Thank goodness we have a camera. Because it's not just memory that matters. It's not just memory. It's bald-faced lies. There's a difference in not remembering every detail of a car accident or a shooting, like you heard Joe Stevens talk about. We know that memories can be terrible. We know, though, that the more routine stress is, the more proactive you are as an officer, the better you are at handling it. And Michael Slager was just fine at handling stress. You heard from his colleagues, his co-workers, he was one of the best at handling stress. He was inoculated. You know who wasn't inoculated? The only person we've heard here talk about shaking, about tears, is Faden Santana. You better believe he was stressed. And for Mr. Savage to sit here and say he's not a patriot, he didn't know what to do. He did not know what to do. And who did he go to? He didn't go to some drug dealer on the street. He didn't go to a fellow barber. He went to Tywayne Weems because he knew he was a principal at a school and that he would have good judgment and that he could guide him. And they decided to let's wait and see what North Charleston's going to do. Let's see. He didn't ask for one dime from those people. Yeah, he wanted some money so he could get out of here and take care of his family back home in Dominican. But he didn't shake those people down. And as soon as they saw that North Charleston, i.e. Michael Slager, wasn't doing the right thing, they got with those lawyers and they got that video to them. No strings attached. Joe Stevens talked to you about his shooting, and I know many people were wondering why should you let him talk about a 1990 shooting that has nothing to do with anything for 30 minutes or however long it was. I'll tell you why. Because that shooting could have been more different than this one. You had a rookie who had not been inoculated, who reacted to stress, who shot somebody coming at his partner with a knife. And the doctor told you what stress can do. It can bring out the real person. After Joe Stevens shot that guy, what did Joe Stevens do? He went to him and said, "What can I do to help you?" And the guy says, "Can you call my grandma?" And he's like, "I'm nervous. I don't know if I can remember the number." He's trying to help the guy that he's just shot, because that's his mission, to serve and to protect. And that mission means protecting people sometimes from themselves. Listen, I couldn't do it. I don't hardly deserve to be in the same room with those guys and girls. It is tough. It is vital to what we do. But that's why accountability is so important. That's why we've got to have it. So it doesn't matter if Michael Slager, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he believed this guy still had to take it. What did you hear from the testimony? You heard Alabama orange juice. And that wasn't taught everywhere. That was one guy's way. One guy, Sergeant Webb, who took responsibility for himself, who was fit, who was trimmed, who talked about how he remembered ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. Whatever it takes. Alabama orange juice. And several of the officers told you what that meant. That's your goal. Their goal is to eliminate threats when they use deadly force. Nowhere. You heard eliminate threat all 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm really going home with you. You heard it over and over and over. It doesn't say kill him. It doesn't say shoot him. It says you can use deadly force until the threat is eliminated. 18 feet, 50 feet, whatever, it's gone. Ability and opportunity. The distance matters. The fact that the taser had no cartridge matters. The fact that he told Lieutenant Bowman that day, took both cartridges off. He knew it had no probes. He told Sled. He took the probes off because he didn't think the drive stone was going to work with the probes in, so he took them off to drive stone Walter Scott. He knew it was a contact weapon. It was a hand-to-hand weapon. Jeopardy. Again, taser, no cartridge. You heard some testimony. There can be a brachial stun, whatever it's called, where you do the taser in the neck. You didn't hear anybody say that they had ever been tased by a suspect with the brachial. I mean, if you're going to get to somebody's neck, it's going to take a lot to get there. But what you also heard about a brachial stun is it's not just a taser that can cause that. People who know what they're doing can give you that with their hand. Wade Humphreys, North Charleston Police Department, 3 or 4 days ago, bald guy, SWAT, he testified. Mr. Durant asked him, are there other ways to get it? Yes. Can you get it with an open hand slap? Yes, you can. We don't shoot people with sharp elbows that can break noses, open hand that can give brachial stuns. And we don't shoot people with tasers that are only good in close contact. Lieutenant Buskirk, defense witness, straight out of Central Castle. There couldn't have been a more squared away, respectable, responsible officer testified for you. And he talked a lot about training. He's the one who told y'all about doing the training exercises and how he almost had an argument with one of the guys because the guy recalled wrong what happened. You know, he said he thought he was being insubordinate, and then he realized, wait a minute, this guy really thinks that's what happened. And that does happen. You know what else happens? People lie. People lie to save their skin. But Buzzkirk, he was impressive. Again, he's been doing this job for 25 years or something. What did he tell you about what he knows about taser with no cartridges, whether or not deadly force is appropriate? He told you himself, a reasonable person, a reasonable officer in Lieutenant Buzzkirk told each and every one of you that if the taser has no cartridges and the officer knows it, if the suspect is at a distance and the suspect is running away, deadly force is not authorized per their policy. And I submit to you per the law. C.J. Habersham, he was the first officer on the scene. He testified eons ago. He told you he knows to reassess after every use of force. The tase, the trigger pull, the baton. He knows that the taser with no cartridge is not a danger from a distance. It requires physical contact. You heard about the training. You know that North Charleston is accredited. You know that the defendant was trained in active shooter, shoot, don't shoot. You know that he knows ability, opportunity, jeopardy. You know that they can't teach every scenario that comes up. But he had the training. He had it. He also had his own discretion and judgment that he used on occasion. You heard the testimony. He's been in a situation where somebody took a taser from him before this. They're not dead. He knows how to use his discretion and judgment. Yes, we know crime can happen any time, but we also know there are peak times. We also know that area, Law&Crime, high crime area. You heard Jellicoe talk about how he's been with North Charleston for 20-something years. He's never heard of the Yellow Brick Road or that immediate area. You saw the insurance business right there. You saw Vance Auto Parts. I have no doubt that crime happens there. But he wasn't like headed into the, bowels of the whole world. Was he weak and disadvantaged? I don't know. There's one person who would know that, Michael Slager. If he can't handle it, it's up to him to know that. Own it. You got his driver's license. You got his car. And for the first time, you heard Mr. Slager say yesterday, well, I locked my car before I left. That was totally gratuitous. I locked my car. Why did he say that? Because for a few weeks we've been talking about the judgment of leaving Pierre Fulton in Walter Scott's car, leaving that patrol car there, wide open. Well, then suddenly yesterday it's locked. But on dispatch, what's he saying to dispatch that morning? I need a unit to secure my cruiser. He needed to get it secure. He knew it was open. He knew he shouldn't have left it. Jason Dandridge, another one of their witnesses. You reassess once force is applied and determine if you need to add more. You reassess your use of force to determine if the threat has stopped. Not just to determine if they're dead, to determine if they're no longer a threat. Jerry Jellicoe, you're trained to go up a level in force. We get it. The suspect's actions dictate. He's hauling it away. That dictates what the response is. You go up a level because you can always come back down. The distance. And does it matter? Yes, it matters. Does the time matter? It matters too. And yes, you need to be careful about angles. But, you know, again, we heard from Mr. Licio, and he was impressive, and the Pharaoh was very cool. But, you know, I really took note. First of all, I took note, and you heard me ask him about how important it is to have these reports and this information well in advance, and he's said in other cases, but yet we get the report that morning. So let's talk about using the Pharaoh to eliminate errors and raise confidence in the product. Because it's so much easier to see problems using Pharaoh, because again, we got to batch Bill Williams for using the old-fashioned method of transparencies on one thing to see if it matches versus feeding it into a computer. So what did Mr. Licio tell you? Okay, first shot. And you will remember from the testimony that everybody used a frame right around here as the first shot. You can remember that by the knee kind of being forward. Bill Williams used it, Grant Fredericks used it, David Licio used this frame as well. Okay? So then Mr. Licio, because we need to see things true to life, creates that, which I submit to you does not make things very true to life. And again, we know it's supposedly the same frame because we got Walter Scott's knee forward, like it is there. With me? Remember to put that on. Look at how he has Officer Slager. The devil is in the details. Right foot forward. He based everything he did on that stance. Right foot forward. See that stripe in the pants? It's on the outside of the left leg. His right foot isn't forward. His right foot is back. There's another frame just a few seconds later that's clear. The right foot is back. Yet we went through all of that, all of this expertise, all of this wisdom. No, you can't do it the old-fashioned way because Pharaoh is so much better and it's so much more accurate. And he's got the feet in the wrong position. And as it continues on, you can tell, you'll be able to see it for yourself. His right foot isn't forward. And so this is the same guy who then tells you that we're still on first shot. If you decide you don't agree with me and you want to go with Licio's interpretation, it's fine. He's at 18 feet, Bill Williams is at 17 feet. It's fine. And I hesitated to even bring this to y'all's attention, except that I think you ought to know it. I think you ought to use it in evaluating. But if this is accurate, first of all, I know I'm not as big as Michael Slager, but that is not true to life. But second of all, if that's the first shot, what happens? He misses. And although we can't do the order of shots on the video, my point here is if he misses on that first shot, if you believe Licio and he misses on the first shot, what's he got to do? He's reassessing. He's moving to follow that target. He's seeing that that target's getting further away, and he's knowing that he's shooting a man in the back. The distances do matter. And it's not just the first shot. And Licio told you all he was asked to do was the first shot. The reason that we went old school for you is because old school is real. That's not real. This is real. your jury view was real. Nothing tells you more about 17 feet. I don't care how you put it in PowerPoint. I don't care what poster you put it on. Nothing tells you about distance more than this tape measure. And that's why we stretched it across this courtroom over and over and over again, because that, for those of you who don't work with tape measures, for those of you who don't watch football every Saturday, maybe you don't know how many feet, how many yards. You can see it with this. It's not just 17 feet. It's 17 feet. It's 20, 23, 26, 29, 31, 34. And if he were trying to exaggerate things, he'd have shot 80 on there, and he would have come up with some number for it. He didn't do that. He told you the time. It's not 1.5 seconds the whole day long. And if 1.5 seconds isn't enough, none of us will make it to court every day for the last few weeks. We'd all be laid up in some hospital in a car wreck if we couldn't make quick decisions. 1.5 to 4.8 seconds. And Mr. Savage likes to tell you this decision was made in nanoseconds. Let's talk about exaggeration. What is a nanosecond? 1/1000th of a second. He had 1.49 billion nanoseconds to make the right call. And if he messed up on the first one, he had more time. And on and on. And so Mr. Licio tells you, Mr. Savage talks about how disingenuous we are. I can't tell you where the taser came from. We've never told you we could tell you where the taser came from. We brought you the information, and what you saw, what Licio pointed out to you, is that taser looks to be down there, in between his feet. And it looks like his leg goes back. And I can think of a million ways that you can be this way and then be that way. Because his feet don't stay in that position the whole time. And I submit to you, regardless of that, look at where his feet are now. They aren't perpendicular with the green grass. They're pointed down the yellow brick road. Whether or not he kicked it, whether or not he put it on the ground, he knew that Walter Scott didn't have a taser. That's why he didn't have to look for it. He knew. And even if he didn't know, he knew that the taser wasn't wasn't a danger from that distance. So how far in all were these shots? I'll tell you exactly how far they were. They were too far. And how fast were they? What was the time between each draw? You can time it out for yourself. But if you really want to know, I'll tell you. It was enough time. It was enough time to reassess the situation. I hadn't talked about him much. We have to thank goodness for Faye Santana. You saw him testify. He wasn't some militant, protester. The only reason he got hooked up with Black Lives Matter to get the video to those people was that he was searching Facebook to see who posted nice things about Walter Scott to try to find that family. There's no evidence he had anything else to do with that group. Regardless of what you think of him, it doesn't matter. He wasn't out to score anything. He wrote a poem about injustice. There's nothing wrong with that. He used his art instead of resorting to violence. I mean, the man came to this country with his family, and how many different jobs does he have? Between working construction, between learning how to barber, doing landscaping, trying to make it. And Mr. Savage has the audacity to say to you, who wouldn't take this recording straight to the police? I'll tell you who wouldn't. The man who had just watched an officer murder someone right before his eyes. That's who doesn't go to the police right away. That's who wants a lawyer. It's okay for everybody else in this case to have a lawyer, except for Faye Santana. He needed protection. And you heard Ty Wayne Weeds talk about him. The 25-year-old man, how often does this happen? He's been in a stressful situation. He goes to counseling for it. Tywin Williams got him hooked up for counseling because he was so stressed out about this. This isn't a joke. He was here by himself. He needed a way out. He wrote poetry. You heard him testify. You judged his credibility, and you know he was telling you the truth when he told you that from minute one, the only thing he saw Walter Scott do was try to get away. He never saw him come in at Officer Slager. And you heard Levi Miles, who was the guinea pig. No, they didn't act out the whole struggle. But Levi Miles, the investigator for Slager's lawyer at the time, told you what it was like to play the role and how they were coming up at the same time. And Slager says that he's coming at him when he's shooting him. And he's coming at him, and as he turns, he gets shot. Because he knows he's got to explain that. I'm not even going to get into whether or not we know what the back is. Spent a half day of testimony trying to figure out what shooting somebody in the back is about. Come on. You're going to hear the instruction on self-defense and reasonable force. The defendant must be without fault. He must be in imminent danger. He must have no other way to avoid the danger. How do you avoid the danger of Walter Scott running away? You stand still. You don't have to tuck your tail and run. You got a gun. You know Habersham is almost there. Stay put. Reasonable force. You heard the officers, the reasonable officers telling you about when it's necessary to use force. And it's not when there's a dead taser, a drive stun only taser, that's feet and yards away from it. I'll leave you all alone. We could just play the rest of that timeline. On the screen.
I'm at the Rivers in the pawn shop. Where you at now?
223 dispatch, shots fired. Subject is down. You grab my taser.
That's 223, shots fired. He grabbed your taser. Subject is down at 938.
34 copies on the route.
934, 938.
Is an area. I'm just having to locate him.
That's probably 938.
Pawn shop on Rivers.
Got 5 dispatch starting on that.
A kid comes directly behind the pawn shop.
Two 23 dispatch. I need to secure my vehicle.
Car 223.
Ralphie, where's your vehicle?
Fucking abuse.
Remount Dakota was the location of the stop.
241 dispatch. I'm with his vehicle at the advanced auto park.
On 241, securing the vehicle at advanced auto.
223, are you 10-4? Everyone's 10-4. Jump to the suspect. He's sort of come behind the pawn shop with a kid. Gunshot wound. Looks like the chest. the right side. Unresponsive. I copy. Make sure the scene's secure. Is locate another gunshot wound to the butt.
348 round.
Confirm location of the gunshot victim.
We're behind the pawn shop. If you see my car next to Gerald's, we're behind the pawn shop in the grassy field.
You're referring to Mega Pond on Rivers?
Come on.
654 Rivers Avenue. Dispatch copy at 9:40.
So, you can sit down now. That badge is supposed to be a shield, not a sword. Michael Slager took an oath to protect us, to protect people even from themselves. The charge is murder. You have the option of voluntary manslaughter. I told you earlier, we picked you. We picked all of you because we need you to do the right thing. We trust you to do the right thing. So I charged it. I indicted it. It's time for you to name it, to give it its proper name. Can't be not guilty. Not on these facts, not with South Carolina law. Our community, our courtroom, can only have one fountain for justice. And it's time for Michael Slager to take his drink.
Former members of the jury will take a short break and we'll come back for the jury charge. Please announce their seats. Break of 10 minutes.